Elden Ring is a game rich with world building and general lore into every detail, from the gameplay, item descriptions, names of places, and even the character creation screen at the start of your journey. So rich, and yet also so strategically placed. While it does better than its predecessors in controlling when you're exposed to questline affecting elements in your playthrough, with map regions and the necessary ways forward, so too does it give elaborate clues or concepts that may simply slip on by the average gamer or even the more attentive to its details. Disclaimer: none of this has to do with Night Rain in any way, shape, or form. Night Rain's finished state may not reflect fully on lore I have to share with you here. In fact, it's already been described as a parallel timeline to our own adventure, regarding to that after the shattering, to not contaminate the lore that we'll be most curious with the base game. That said, I will properly look through to see where the similarities and differences are that matter, and how that may reflect on topics people were pretty 50-50 about with its eventual release. Side note: overall, this video is mainly inspired by a more recent video by Lost My Sanity, aka Perfectly Lost, where he talks about things that don't seem to make much sense, but add a lot of atmosphere and character to areas and presentation. While I agree that it doesn't seem to make much sense from a visual standpoint, a lot of things have more defined, realistic answers to them that are easily to ignore or not consider as the player. Despite how I may parry his argument, he is a good content creator you should check out, a pretty decent invader with a fun and funny personality, links in description. That out of the way, let's dive right in. But with that said, let's engage one of the big areas he spoke at, Castle Morne. This is the castle the player is supposed to conquer before Stormvale to better acquaint with the pacing of the game with their current resources at this earlier point. And it's met with plenty more simplified designs to navigate it, and also a few unusual aspects to exploring it that kind of make it more curious for the player. At a first glance, it may seem the owners of the castle must have had an unusual architect, or a developer might have not cared to how thought out it was to a logical sense, until you stumbled across this talisman which reads, "A talisman depicting a twin blade and a confessor. Enhances the final hit ending in a chain of attacks. The twin blade technique is a tradition of the confessors, who closely guard the secret of how they preserve the momentum of their attacks. Thus the final strike of their onslaught all the more deadly." To find something like this here, after it telling that their art is a secret, could suggest that this is not just anyone that came down this way. It could be no less than assassins of the Two Fingers, sort of trusted priests. But that's only a fraction of the conversation. In the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, a character called Moore sells a note explaining that spirit springs in the lands between had been sealed away and how to unlock them by breaking the stone structures nearby that seal them. When we might recall in the beginning of our journey, we received a tutorial notice about spirit springs as a sort of forgotten knowledge just out in the open gameplay. Almost like we should know it. This would imply things of this nature are concepts fully understood by the inhabitants of the lands between, even likely utilized on occasion. But another detail by the player often gets overlooked at this point in the game until later areas, and that is that non-player characters can simply jump kinda higher than us. So paths like this aren't that unreasonable to an extent. In fact, often considered the rarity is seeing the guidance of grace, as proclaimed by several NPCs, where simply seeing grace isn't fully the case, although it was also described by Goldmask that supposedly order in the Erd Tree was once brighter. At least I do believe it was Goldmask that suggested that. At the very beginning of the game, we are told of such individuals who've seen the guidance of grace. One may consider Roderica as a sort of outlier, being at the Round Table Hold at all despite never seeing Grace's guidance. However, she once had people who fought for her and soon fallen. Roderica herself may not have seen it, but her comrades might have. And they were certainly tarnished who could have brought her there with encouraging words. But before we retire the conversation of Limgrave, let's talk about this whole island grave bit. You see this wall on the way to this boss? Well, this isn't just any wall. It's an arch. A triumphal arch, to be precise. Just beyond it is a misbegotten Leonine, who's found the treasured sword of Castle Morne, the grafted blade greatsword, which belongs to the now fallen hero of Morne, who slew an entire clan and grafted their blades together as one big old sword. He was then defeated by Godfrey, according to these swords outside the front entrance, giving us a bit of lore of a great event that happened. There's no way of us knowing what led to all of this, but what matters is that we can know there was something more to this castle, once unlike how we see it now. Looking around what was once an arena to us is what could have been further defenses and structures fallen in the battle against Godfrey, and graves arranged from likely the aftermath. The most telling details, however, is this as a triumphal arch that is in perfect condition, and the designs at the top are something considerably unlike anything else in this part of the game even. So early on, and a sparingly used asset, is an unusual characteristic to say the least, but you might have also noticed the trims and design also being unlike the rest of the castle as well. From experience, details like this are often deliberate on FromSoft's end, including in previous titles. This became abundantly clear when in an interview, Miyazaki took us through how the making of Elden Ring was ambitiously different than how he normally approaches the process of making a game. He's stated that he worked on the gameplay first, then the lore and world building second. That is to say, for the Dark Souls series, or Bloodborne even. I theorize this meant he'd have extra stuff made that wasn't necessarily going to be used as much as he wanted to use it. So in that context, cut content didn't nearly mean unused canonical details. However, he's also described how he's wanted to affect the effect of interpretation to kind of skew players into sort of making it their story. and this is important for their adventure. So I've also concluded it's pure hit and miss if unused things are actually canonical or not, because it may serve a better purpose of letting the player make an interpretation and decide what's the truth of their world. The big difference of this matter to Elden Ring is the lore and world building happened first, and then he did the design the world and gameplay around it. So there's considerably fewer questions of if something's unused and is canonical details or not, and more of just a matter of whether Miyazaki wanted to use it or not. In most cases, for like the important details, of course. So like, say Egon or whatever, as opposed to having whoever it was that was initially going to use the Brave set or whatever, or what was called the Brave set, I'm pretty sure, and now it's called like Egon's clothes or rags or whatever. In which case, if we looked at what's cut from the game, much of it did get sort of like used in like the DLC, or just in general reimagined a step further. Moving on, though, is another topic I liked that Lost brought up, and that was the rooftop parts of Raya Lucaria, and I have a genuine answer. At a first glance through Raya Lucaria, the player can deduce lots of unusual magic-natured foes and entities, but the Legacy Dungeon itself describes it as an academy. While it is an academy, one thing is true above all else, and that it was being ruled by the Carian household of Rennala and her full moon. One thing notable of these Carians, however, is that they keep secrets of their powers and defenses to only those they can trust and are faithful to them. The most noteworthy example being Art of the Carian Retaliation. For the less familiar, Carian Retaliation is the art of spell parry, but with the added bonus of rearming the magic once against the original attacker. So, spell comes at you, you parry it, and it gets used against the original attacker. Carian Retaliation, in this sense, is also like the full moon sorcery in that it bests the attacks of magic incoming from another spellcaster in the user's safety. But the Carians take the keeping of the secrets so serious that they would snuff out anything getting too close to it, especially if they were a ridiculed blunt stone. Conveniently behind Thops's desk of study is just such a place with the hidden passageway to overlook such an individual and take them out. But this was only part of the measures in Raya Lucaria's design to navigate the school from behind, normal walkway, and measures students from other angles you might miss. Such was a pathway Selene likely traversed herself and was of great recognition, only to also be caught dabbling with less humane practices of study of sorcery in the interest of the sorcerer Azure's research of primeval current, which is essentially the beginnings of sorcery, the beginnings to like stars and whatnot. But her curiosity would eventually lead her to Caelid, and on the hunt for another renowned sorcerer who dabbled in such investigation of the primeval current. This sorcerer was called Lusat. This search would prove fruitful to the request of a preceptor's curiosity, in the name of Rani especially, but it would also be where Selene herself is caught and taken by Jaren of the Redmanes. who proves to be just as familiar to the information that this preceptor was looking for. Should you get to that part of the quest and go to him, he will actually kind of tell you, and as well as you have to go back between him and EG. Now this is assuming you go take out the two bosses before Jaren, but it is something you can certainly do. We can know this much to be true as the Redmanes and Radahn especially fought to protect the town of Celia in the battle against Malenia. Celia, however, hides an important secret that isn't well explained to the player, but after a few glances and piecing together the details, we might realize that Lusat himself is kept there, hidden in a cave from the outside world, with magic basically making it look like as though it doesn't even exist. And he was locked up with a key that Cel intends to have, that can break the seal that he is kept behind. Also kept behind a sealed door in Celia is a Nox duo fight that keep Lusat's staff. But also kept behind the big sealed door that leads to Lusat is also a church keeping one such underling born of Malenia. Important or not, Millicent is of that sort of descending, and she is also a grave sort of carrier of the rot in its current standing. And down the road from her is essentially a bridge crossing sort of checkpoint that also goes to a tower keeping a sorcery under the radar, essentially, that provides a similar sort of protection to that of full moon sorcery. So we can kind of conclude that Jaren's influence of policing sorcery is also deeply tied to the Carians. But back towards Lusat's cave is a spirit spring that leads to a fort in the Redmane territory with quite a plethora of dragons in the front of it. Now this fort, however, while it is basically currently run by spirits, it also keeps half of a medallion to the Grand Lift and the northern part of Liurnia that goes to Altus Plateau. But I've actually already done a pretty well detailed, pretty good breakdown of the overall shattering in terms of events in a very, very different video. And I do think it has quite a lot worth to check out if you haven't. And some of it you may really like finding out about. Like, I explain a lot of things from bridges collapsed in the current setting to towers that are no longer there. There's a lot of interesting things to talk about that I feel like aren't discussed enough, and it puts it to a good place all in one video. So please do get that checked out if you have the time or interest. Link in the description. Or something I didn't talk about, however, there is that there's a lacking of dragons in Limgrave, but areas with carrion folk such as Caelid or the Moonlight Altar, they are rich with dragons. This is partially because sorcerers are more history of unusual friendship and even like servants and whatnot when it comes to their relationships and social life. Ranni herself has basically a pet dragon she has taught frost magic to, in which case we also tend to see that there is other dragons that have appeared indeed in the Moonlight Altar. Whether they're in some way related to that dragon or not, we can't really know. But overall, the surplus isn't simply that maybe they aren't hunting the dragons, but there's also a lack of like dragon communion folks that reach these areas. Like Limgrave, it's Godric's territory. Certainly, the Banished Knights should be able to just proceed through and onward and hunt a dragon that's right there. And in a similar sort of contrast, there is that Dragon Communion Church in Caelid, and while it does have Banished Knights there, it's also Redmane territory. And the dragon that's out in front seeps with scarlet rot. So there's certainly lots of reason for them to not go after it, especially if they don't have a death wish. But Radahn's Redmanes are hardened and excelled at dealing with flames. They use flames often, they're resilient to it. So any sort of typical dragon's breath that these Banished Knights could whip up, it's not going to do them a whole lot of service in combat. Especially against the Redmane's better use of flames, gravity as well. It's already well described that there's an advantage of gravity over what could be perceived as the flight of their storm arts as well. This is, however, where I'll have to stop for now with today's video. The concept flow of this one is a little everywhere. I'll have to work out with the new editing standards I've been trying to work with, as well as a few other things I'm kind of experimenting on. But I'm very thankful you indeed sat through and listened to this long video. I say long, but it's not as long as certain other ones I've certainly had. I contemplated trying for more of a go there and spit out facts kind of video, but then I wondered how I could maintain a better quality video than my rushed video looking at the Night Rain announcement trailer. As usual, all feedback is appreciated and taken into consideration. You may have noticed that I've been experimenting with this one little character look I made in-game and displayed both on screen and in thumbnails. I think he's a nice little thinker sort of character that matches the kind of look and personality I want to sort of reflect upon as being almost like me being invested in whatever I want to share deeper sort of meaning of standpoint or thought. In general, I never been on the universal fashion per se in games, so I don't have like a universal character look I want to rely on. And on a side note, I also don't want to like use my like avatar image unless if I like redevelop it into more of like a character sort of face as opposed to just sort of being my logo or whatever for the channel at the time being. So it's a bit of like a hit or miss thought on my end. Anyways, this has been Blue Exorcism Solstice, and thank you so much for watching. And you have yourselves a great day. Bye bye.